Alright, hello again everyone, Phoenix here. We are almost all the way through our flight to Cancun. We're about, what is that, about half an hour? Yeah, just over half an hour from our top of descent. So at this point we would start to think about planning our descent and approach. So the first thing we do is grab the weather for Cancun. Now the weather right now is the winds are out of the east about 5 knots and a little bit of reduced visibility. They're down to 7 miles. They're not too bad though. 29 degrees, it's pretty warm. And otherwise good weather, just a few clouds around, with an altimeter of 2990. So our flight plan actually specifies VOMAR to VOMAR1 alpha for the star, but I'm just going to show you guys, because the SimBrief doesn't always plan the appropriate star into the airport, so it's up to you to kind of come up with what you want. So let me just pull up the charts here real quick. Use that one, there we go, and then we'll come over here to Cancun, open charts. Alright, so there's 4 stars listed here, and these are actually composite plates. This is pretty common in countries other than the US and Canada to have all these various stars listed on one plate. And all you got to do is look through these and see which one makes the most sense. So this one comes in from the south, so that's not what we want. This one looks like it's also from the south, which is not what we want. This one comes in from the north via VOMAR and via NOSAT and via Zudun. So depending on what the last fix in your flight plan is, you can plan one of these. Now, the last fix in the flight plan should match the initial fix on one of the stars, but if it doesn't, then again, it'd be up to you to get yourself to one of these fixes somehow. Just pick the one that makes the most sense based on where you're coming in from. Now, we also have to pick between this one and this one, because these both come in from the north from the same fixes. However, one is for the 12s and one is for the 30s, so depending on which runway is active, they do have a preference for the 12s in Cancun, and it usually is 12s. So we will use this one. We'll use the VOMAR1 alpha. So we're going to come in via VOMAR and then Agnix, Epnel, and then into the RNAV for runway 12 left. And again, you can just pick a runway. In real life, of course, they'd have preferences. They would assign you whatever they needed to, but in the sim, of course, you can just pick one. So I'm going to pick the RNAV, so the RNP, sorry, for runway 12 left. I keep forgetting they name them a little bit differently down here. You could go for the VOR-DME, either one of those, the ILS, whatever you want to pick. But for me, the RNAV makes the most sense because it does connect to the star, and it also allows you to stay in LNAV, VNAV the entire time. So let's load it up. So we're going to departure arrival. I'm going to go arrive into Cancun. Page through here until we find the VOMAR1 alpha right there. And then it's going to be the, where is it here? RNAV 12 left, this guy right here. And the transition is going to be VIKSI, I believe, but let me just double check. So VOMAR, yeah, no, and then VIKSI, it ends there and then comes in. Yeah, so it's going to be the VIKSI transition, which is right here. And so that's the VOMAR1 alpha, RNAV 12 left, VIKSI transition, so we'll execute that. It said unable 280 knots at one of the fixes coming in here, and the reason for that is our descent transition speed is actually slower than 280 knots. So to fix that, all you got to do is replan it for 280 knots. Execute that, and that'll get rid of that alert. It's unable to accelerate from its transition speed in order to make a fixed restriction. It can't do that, so you need to increase that speed to match the highest restriction on the star. And that's that. We would verify waypoints and altitudes normally. Don't really have to do that in the sim because you can just assume it's correct. Not like we can do that in real life. And then we're going to put in the final approach course of 125. 125 and 125 over here. There we go. So 125 on both sides. We're going to select auto brake 3. You'd work out a landing distance based on the runway chart here, or the airport chart, I mean. Or is it here? Based on which exit you want to get off on. But auto brake 3 is a usual standard for minimum runway occupancy as well. So we'll just aim for Alpha 3 and get off there with auto brake 3. Also going to use flaps 30 because there's no reason to use flaps 40. If you double click the button, it puts 30 and 147 in there. Okay, we're going to use flaps 30 in there for ref as well, 147. And that's about it for the setup. Yeah, we should be good to go. Just follow the approach now. Now, if you look in the legs page, you're going to find all the waypoints and altitudes from the approaches are already in here. If they weren't, you could put them in manually, but it's just a matter of verifying what's in there against the chart, making sure it's all correct. And you can tell as I page through here that you've done it correctly because there are no discontinuities and there are no weird track changes. Like the tracks are all fairly similar to what they should be. There's no big turns or anything like that, or bypasses are a good indication that you may have done something wrong too. It's not necessarily all the time if there's a bypass you've done something wrong, but if there is a bypass, just take a close look, make sure that you haven't planned something incorrect. And if it is correct, then you just reduce the speed a little bit at that fix, and hopefully it'll fix the bypass. But that's it for the setup, and then I'll get back to you guys here during the descent. Alright folks, so we're just about up to top of descent here, and I just want to illustrate one issue that has come up a couple times in the support channel, and that is the issue of the VNav not following the descent profile and ending up super high and only coming down at a few hundred feet a minute. So I just want to illustrate what happens with that, and the cause of that can be that your physical thrust levers have been left up and not down at idle. So what happens at top of descent is that the auto throttle rolls the thrust levers back to idle, and then when it gets to idle, it goes into arm mode, which means you have direct control over the thrust levers, and they just kind of stay wherever you put them. It basically disengages the auto throttle, but it leaves it armed so that it can wake up again if it needs to. But if your thrust levers are up, if your physical throttles are up, then the thrust just literally snaps right back to where it was when you first set it on takeoff there, presumably. And results in a really high thrust setting, and the airplane doesn't want to descend, and it'll eventually go to VNav speed because it can't maintain the descent path. And when it does that, then it just targets whatever your speed bug is set to, and it pitches for that speed. And if you have a ton of thrust on, that explains the very, very slow descent, because you have all that thrust and it doesn't need to pitch down much to maintain that speed. So I'm going to deliberately leave my thrust levers up here at the top of descent just so you can see kind of what happens. And I'll also show you then how to fix that once you've kind of realized what's going on. So yeah, we'll just let it go here for a minute. Alright, so we're only a few miles from top of descent here. It's always a good idea to do a nice master caution recall before you start your descent, and that way if there's anything that's popped up during the flight that you've forgotten about or whatever, that'll pop up and you can take care of it. Oh yeah, reset MCP altitude, that would help. So if you get close enough within 5 miles of top of descent and you haven't changed your MCP altitude yet, it'll give you that little warning, and that's kind of a cue to ask air traffic control for a lower altitude. I don't have ATC online tonight, so I'm just going to go all the way down to 5,000 feet for now. I also haven't set minimums because the weather's good enough in Cancun that it's basically just a VFR visual approach with the RNAV as a backup. So I don't need to set minimums for that. Alright, so we're going to have a look at what happens when we get to the top of descent here. You'll see the auto throttle goes to retard, and then once it reaches idle, it'll go to arm and probably snap back up to where my physical thrust levers are, which is right about there. Okay, so there's retard. It's going to bring him back to idle very slowly and initiate this descent. Oh, don't mind that. That's just my passenger simulator thingy, PACX. This is actually a live flight I'm doing on air right now, so it's kind of doing the whole shebang. Okay, so the thrust levers will eventually get to idle. And there you go. See, it flipped to arm. Thrust comes back up. Speed starts to increase. Now it's still in VNav path, so it is still following the vertical path. But in just a second here, it's going to have to do something to protect itself. Speed reversion is likely to kick in here. You can see that path is starting to just deviate a little bit below us there. Drag required, yeah. And there's VNav speed. See that? It's just going to pitch up. It's going to vastly reduce the rate of descent. I'm not touching anything, by the way. My hands are in my lap right now. And it's just going to pitch all the way up to try to bring that speed back down. And see, the vertical speed is basically 0. Yeah, it's actually climbing because I have so much thrust on. It's going to do its best to try to get that speed back. But see how the path has completely gotten away from us? That's why. It's because your thrust is up. So now to fix it, if I obviously reduce the thrust to idle, so that's not going to be enough though, because we were planned at an idle descent anyway, and now we're at 1,500 feet high. So what I'm going to do, of course, is use the speed brake. That's one thing. Speed brake's not really a catch-all, fix-all though, because it doesn't really do a whole lot in this airplane. It's not very effective, especially in the 800. It's better at slowing down if you're in level flight than it is at increasing your rate of descent. So in order to get that back, I'm going to actually go speed intervene, open the window. I'm going to dial in the highest speed that I'm comfortable with, which is about 0.79 while we're still in Mach here. And then once we get up to or down to a lower altitude, up to a higher airspeed indicated, then I'll flip it over to airspeed with the changeover button there if it doesn't do it by itself. And we've planned a 280 knot descent, so it should actually have transitioned to knots right there. If the window had been closed, it would have transitioned to knots at 280 and would have just sat right there. So now that I'm keeping it open at Mach 7.9, you can see the path is coming back rapidly because this is a lot faster than we had planned, and it's actually still increasing because we're still in Mach, right? So if we had transitioned to airspeed, I'll just hit change over here. There's 300. So the airspeed's going to stop increasing now because it's just going to maintain 300 knots. And we're already way below the slope. So once you get below the slope, you can stow the speed brake, close the window. It goes back to FMC speed and VNAV path because now we're so far below the slope that it needs to actually shallow the descent to get back to the path. And this is going to allow it to reduce the speed back to 280 knots. If you close the window right when the vertical path is like right bang on the center, then the airplane will follow it. It'll go back to VNAV path and it'll keep following the path, but your speed is going to be way high, and there's no opportunity for it to lose that extra speed, at least not built into the flight plan. You might be okay anyway, depending on weather, winds, that kind of thing, but it's better if you get maybe 500 feet or so below the slope and then close the window, and that just allows an opportunity for that extra speed to bleed off as it gets the path back. So that's how you recover from that. From this point in, it's you pretty much just watch the airplane do its thing. Leave it in LNAV VNAV for this because it's an LNAV RNAV approach, RNP approach, and I'll get back to you guys once we're ready for some flaps. All right, so something's come up here, guys, which I feel I should probably point out. Actually, it's an interesting issue. It says unable 250 knots at EPNEL. EPNEL is this fix right up here. The reason it says that is because EPNEL, it's planning on crossing it below 10,000 feet. I can tell that if I go delete the restriction. Oops, I'll clear that first. Delete the restriction at EPNEL, and you can see that it's planning on crossing it, or it would be planning on crossing it at 8,200 feet. Well, 9,000 is the lowest, so it's going to stay at 9,000 feet there. But it's planning on crossing it below 10,000 feet. If you go on the descent page, you'll see that actually you won't see it because there's a speed restriction at Agnex in there instead. But you would normally see that the speed limit it's going to aim at below 10,000 feet is 240 knots. So it can't go faster than that. So because it's planning EPNEL 250 knots, or sorry, EPNEL restrictions at 250 knots, it's planning 240 knots below 10,000 feet. It doesn't work. And it won't let you go faster than that. What you would normally do is just delete the restriction there at Agnex. You'll see that, nope, 200, there we go, 240 at 10,000 feet. Just change that to 250, like so, and that will get rid of the unable 250 knots at EPNEL when you execute it. I'm not going to do that because of my monitoring software. I don't want it to get triggered with an overspeed. Also, it looks like we need some speed brake here. So unable 250 knots at EPNEL. The other thing you can do is put EPNEL at 240 and just put that in there. Either way that works, but that's why it does that. So I just figured that was worth a little bit of an explanation. Anytime it says unable to speed, just check what overall speed it's aiming at in the descent page there. So we're using a little bit of speed brake here to help slow down for 10,000 feet. And we're going to turn the landing lights on here, going through 10. Turn the turn-offs on when I'm cleared for landing, but since there's no ATC tonight, we'll just leave those on. Make sure the belts are on. There we go. And I'm hoping this thing is going to actually decelerate through 250 knots. The real airplane does this too sometimes. Now, it hasn't leveled out, and that is something that I believe is a bug. Normally it would level out, go to like 200 or 300 feet a minute descent in order to slow down, and it's not doing that. So that's a bit of an issue. But it looks like it's coming down here now. It's shallowing out for some reason. And now we're below 250, so we'll stow the speed brake, and hopefully the rest of this will go off without a hitch. Oh, nope, never mind. We got too far off the vertical path because it shallowed out for some reason, and now we're in VNAV speed. So just like before, I don't even need to use the speed brake for this, I don't think. All I do is open the speed window, roll that up to even like 245, 250. Let's go to 250. I guess just because we can't go faster than 250, we will have to use the speed brake.
Ladies and gentlemen, the seatbelt sign is now turned on, so it is time to return to your seat and fasten your seatbelt.
And that'll get the path back, and then we can close the window in a little bit here.
We have begun our final descent into your destination. Flight attendants will be passing through the cabin to collect any trash one final time. Please ensure tray tables are stowed and seats are in the full upright position. Please also store any carry-on items either in the seat back pocket or under the seat in front of you. Please complete all Wi-Fi related tasks and stow any larger electronics.
Alright, so let's go ahead. Since we only had 10 knots to lose, and it doesn't matter if we're a little bit fast, let's go ahead and close the window. Here we go. FMC speed, VNAV path, and we'll also stow the speed brake. Alright guys, so we're getting close to the runway now, starting to think about maybe putting out some flaps before too long. In Cancun, there's a very long final. The star leads you in quite a ways out, and you fly along level at 4,000 feet for a little bit, and then come down to 3,000 feet, fly level for a little bit. So we'll just let the airplane sequence its way in here. It's also limited 220 knots or less because of the star. You can see the runway out there in the distance. And as far as when to actually start configuring the airplane, it really depends on the approach and, you know, the conditions and what you're trying to do. So in most cases, about 12 to 15 miles or so from the runway is a good time to put out flaps 1. But it does all come down to just doing it enough that you know what the airplane will do, how it will perform. So we're coming up here on the point where we probably want to start getting some flaps out. So I just want to illustrate something here. We'll just start configuring. So let's go flaps 1. So when you select flaps 1, see the speed will jump down by itself to the flaps 1 bug because the window's closed, and the airplane will decelerate down to the flaps 1 speed. But then let's say ATC says, well, this is a bad example because I would usually use 190, but let's say ATC says maintain 210 knots for spacing. So all I have to do is open up the speed window again, set 210, and because because the flaps are out, they're already set to flaps 1, the airplane will maintain VNAV path. It will no longer switch to VNAV speed when you open the window. And that happens if the flaps are out or if you're past a certain point on the approach where it goes into its kind of quote-unquote approach logic thing. So opening the window no longer puts it in VNAV speed once your flaps are out or you're close enough. And you can do the same thing as you decelerate. If you select flaps 5 and you want speed 190, you could do that, or whatever. Normally we would leave the window closed unless there's a reason not to. So let's close that up there. It jumps back down to the 1 bug. And we'll go flaps 5. And the bug jumps down to the flaps 5 speed. I'm going to set the field now that we're on a published transition. So field elevation in the window for now. Now the speed may not immediately come back to the flap speed bug, and that's okay. Just keep an eye on it as long as it doesn't get too high. And as long as it's below the next flap extension speed limit, which in our case is for flaps 15 at that 200 knots there. 201, I guess, technically. 2,500 feet, we'll go gear down. Go flaps 15. If you were using speed brake, you now need to stow the speed brake because the speed brake cannot be out beyond flaps 10. It's a good time to arm the speed brake. Flip the ignitions to continuous. 2,500 AGL is probably a pretty good benchmark for the gear in the flaps 15. You don't have to do it right there, it can be later, but I find it helps get stabilized at the right points, hit the right milestones. And then our SOP is to be stabilized by 1,000 feet above the ground, which is coming up here. So 500 feet to go to that gate, so let's go to flaps 30. At this point, I will open the window and add a little bit of speed margin for winds. The winds are pretty light tonight, but I'll just to show you how that would work, right? You'd open the window and just dial in whatever speed correction you needed. You can also do it through the FMC, through the initref target wind correction line there. You can put whatever you want in there, and that way it'll automatically bug that speed. But that's not quite as good because you can't adjust that as easily if the winds change, I've found. So you don't want to be heads down this close to the ground. Alright, there's 1,000 feet. Let's set the missed approach altitude, which in our case is 3,000 feet for this approach. And now all we got to do is land. So once we get down to the runway, I'm going to flare, and then I'm going to just let the nose drop ever so slightly.
Wind 050 at 4 knots.
Let the nose drop ever so slightly and just roll it on, and that should get a nice touchdown in the touchdown zone, and get on the brakes and stop the airplane. 500 feet. Let's disengage the autopilot. Click the button twice to get rid of the autopilot. The first click will disengage the autopilot, the second click will shut the alarm off. The auto throttle off.
50, 30, 20, 10.
And a little bit of nose up.
Landing time logged.
Reverse. I flared a little bit too early there, so I just aborted the... I didn't drop the nose at all, because I flared slightly early. I'm going to make that taxiway. So let's disarm the auto brakes and carry on to the next one. 60 knots. By 60 knots you want to be reverse idle to not suck anything through the engine. Start a timer so that we get our 3 minutes for engine shutdown. Not that we're gonna be longer than that on the taxi anyway. And you can keep reverse idle in all the way down to taxi speed. You won't hurt anything as long as it's at idle.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have reached our destination. The local time is 6:23.
Don't mind the flight attendants.
It's currently about 28 degrees.
Alright, so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to vacate the runway, and once I get off the runway, I'm going to stop and do the after landing flows, because normally it would be done on the fly by the first officer, but since I have to actually taxi the airplane as well, I'll do it once I'm off here. Come to a stop. In the meantime, I can stow the speed brake. Those taxi lights are not lined up with the line. Alright, make sure we're well clear. Oof, good grief, go up this hill. There is a bit of an incline to the actual airport in Cancun, but it's definitely not like a speed bump or anything. Alright, let's stop the airplane. Set the park brake, if I can see it. I can't even see the park brake. Nope, that was the trim wheel. There's the park brake. Turn the dome light on to dim here just so we can see what we're doing. Okay. So the captain, all he has to do is stow the speed brake and turn the landing lights off. Turn off lights off, turn the taxi light on. The first officer will first of all set the transponder to whatever it needs to be on the ground, whether it's surveillance airport or not, for ground radar. Reset the trim to 5, and then we're going to bring the flaps back to up. Gonna shut the auto brake off. Shut the flight directors off. Turn the strobe lights off. Ignition's off, unless the anti-ice has to be on the ground if it's that kind of condition. And then probe heat off. And start the APU. Okay. And that's about it. Then read the after landing checklist. So let's go. And yeah, well, I'll get back to you once we're at the gate ready to shut down. Alright, so here we are at the gate. We would have turned the taxi light off on the turn in towards the gate so we don't blind the marshaller there. And also the APU is ready to be put on the buses, so we're going to do that. And that completes the after landing checklist. We're going to set the park brake. And then you're looking for 2 blue, for the gen off bus lights. 1 red, parking brake is set. 2 dead.
Engine off time logged. The flight is finished. It has been monitored by On Air.
Alright, the fasten belt sign comes off. All the fuel pumps except for 1 come off. Hydraulic pumps come off. We're parking the airplane. And it's not windy. The window heat comes off. IRS selector's off. Because we're done. No, we're not doing a through flight or anything. The FO would turn the beacon light off, anti-collision light off once the engines have spooled down a little bit. Here we go. And that's that. We would then run the parking checklist. And that's our flight. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this series. If you have any questions about it, again, feel free to ask me on the Discord. This is completely like a quick and a rough thing. I didn't really rehearse this at all or anything, and I'm also operating without my normal checklists and my wingman, of course, over here. So yeah, but let me know if you have any questions, and I'll be more than happy to answer them. We'll see you guys later.